we'll pick up from where we left off on Tuesday, and that's just going through this piece of code that we had done the organizer tests for. And what I want to go through, some of you may have done this in the tutorials already, but what I want to go through is this code for finding space in the diary. So remember what we were doing was we had a diary, so we've got a day, which is an object that contains an array, and each element of the array is an appointment. And we can make an appointment by, first of all, creating an appointment object, which has the description of the object and the duration of the appointment. And then we send that, we use a method called makeAppointmentInDay to say, take that appointment and put it in the right slot in the day. Right? So we give it a time, and we want to put the appointment in the right slot corresponding to the time. Okay, remember that? So another method that's inside the day class that helps us is this find space method. And so it's passed an argument which is an appointment object, and the objective of this method is to go down through the list of slots in the day and look for the first available slot that also has enough space for the duration. Right? So if we ask for a 3-hour appointment, so suppose we're trying to find space for a lab, which is, say, 3 hours long, then up the top, the first line, the argument we pass, the appointment, would have in it a duration of 3 hours. Okay? So we have to, in this method, now try to find a 3-hour or 3 consecutive empty slots. Right? Because remember that the way that the day object is structured is that we have an array, and each element in the array is a 1-hour slot. So if we want to find space for a 3-hour appointment, we have to find 3 consecutive empty slots. Okay? So the first line up there, so this line here, first thing we're doing is just getting the duration of the appointment and assigning that to a local variable called duration. If we wanted to, we could have used appointment.getDuration everywhere, except it's a bit of a mouthful to try to keep retyping all the time and slightly inefficient. All right? So that first one is just getting the duration from the appointment object and assigning it to a local variable so that we can reuse it more easily. The next line is a for loop. We have previously, so remember last time we talked about declaring things to be final like that. All right, so that's max appointments per day is a class variable. So remember, static means it's a variable that belongs to the class, not to the instance objects. And by making it final, we effectively make it a constant. So final means that you make one assignment, and then after that you're not allowed to modify it again. All right, so max appointments per day is really just the number of slots that are available to us in the array. Okay, so the for loop is just going through, starting from slot number 0 and going one after the other, and tell me what's the if statement. What's that first if slot? If appointments slot is null, what does that tell us? So we're looking at this line. whoops, that line. Can you tell me what that if statement says? Don't shake your head, try. Just read it. So if what's appointments, square brackets, slot? Can you tell me what that is? What does that one expression? Appointments, slot. What does that mean? What slot? What's the variable slot? Yep.
Slot's just an index value for the array of appointments.
All right, so where slot is declared up in the, say in the for loop, in the line above, we're saying for int slot is assigned 0. So slot is being declared as an integer variable that's declared local to the for loop. And we're using slot as the variable, as the counter that's going to count through our for loop. So up there we're saying that start out slot is initialized to 0, and as long as slot is less than max appointments per day, which is the size of the array of appointments, slot plus plus means every time we go through the loop, we increment slot once by 1. All right? So slot is our counter going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 until the end of the array. So if I say appointments slot in the next line in the if statement, what does just that expression appoints slot get us? You know me? Stop writing and I'll actually listen. If the expression appointments slot, what's the value of that? What's the return value of that expression? In the if statement there. Can you help him? Right, beware, and anybody can be a victim of my pointing, so think. Appointments slot, come on. Well, no, not necessarily. If slot starts out as 0, appointment slot is the whatever is the value of the first element in the array, right? And as we loop through, a slot gets incremented, and slot becomes 1, 2, 3, 4. It's saying find appointments slot means find the 0th element first, and the first element in 2, 3, 4, right? So appointment slot is just saying whatever the value of slot is, it's a number, say 5, get the 5th element or element number 5 from the appointments array. All right? So what is that test asking us? If I say appointments slot equals null, well, you're asking, is the appointment in slot number slot equal to null? Right, that's a Boolean expression. It'll return either true or false. So if there already is an appointment in that position in the array, well, what will that return, true or false? Can you tell me? If there already is an appointment in that slot, what will that test tell us? Will it return true or false? No, hang on, I'm asking someone here. What does null mean? What's the value null? Well, it's a pointer to nothing, a reference to nothing. It means that when we create an array, initially all the values in the array are null. Right? There's just nothing in them. So if we do this test, is there an appointment? Is there some value in position slot of the appointments array? If it equals null, then it means that we haven't put anything in there before. It's empty. So that means that, will that return true or false? If there's something there, will it return true or false? That test. You tell me? Yeah, here. If there is something in, where's my use this. Oh, okay, that's pretty useless. Appointments is an array, and initially all of these slots, all of these elements of the array are empty, so they have a null pointer, right, a null reference that's not referring to anything. When we put an appointment into the array, then, that's a reference to an appointment object that contains a description and a duration, right? Now, if I'm going through, if slot has the value, so that's what is position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. If I ask if the value of slot is 1, then I'm asking up in that if statement, appointments 1, is it empty or is it or not? If I do the test, appointments 1 equals null. Is that true? Is that true or false? Is there something in position 1 of my array? Yes. So is your test appointments 1 equals null? Is that true or false? False, right? So if my test up there is false, what gets executed next by this program? Well, there isn't an else, is there, in this case? Right? If the test in the if statement is false, what is the next statement that gets executed? Okay, we start out, we're in the test up there. What happens next?
You allocate the start of date.
Sorry?
You allocate the start of date plus the time.
No, hang on. If the test is false, what happens to that if statement?
Does it see if it's one hour or something?
No. If it's false, right, all this code inside the if statement only gets executed if that test is true. Right? That's the whole point of the if statement. You only do the stuff inside the if statement if that test is true. So, look, the if statement is all the stuff in there, and that's saying if appointment slot is null, like if that slot is empty, then do this. If not, you don't do any of that stuff. Right? So if we don't do anything inside the if statement, what's the next thing that happens? Sorry? No, hang on. The if statement is inside something else. The if statement is inside what? It's easy. Look to above and to the left of the if. What's the line above the if statement? It's a for loop, right? Meaning go around counting from 0 to the end of the array. So if that if statement, if the condition in the if statement is false, we don't do anything inside that if statement. So what's the next thing that happens?
It jumps to a second slot.
Yeah, the loop continues. So slot. So we had slot equals 1. If we don't, once we've finished the if statement, we go back up, the for loop continues, counts up, and now slot becomes, the value of slot becomes 2. Right? Now, maybe if that one's empty, right, the value of slot is now 2. If I now go, and I loop, so I go back up to the top, to the for loop, and I start again. So now I'm going to go check. What's happened? I've completed the if statement. Now I go back up and redo the next step in the for loop, and I redo the if statement. Right? The value of slot is now 2. So what is the value of appointments of 2? Can you tell me? What is the value of appointments of 2? Given our example here on the board. Null. Right. So you saved yourself. Now, so in my if statement there, I've got if appointments 2 is null, now you can do the stuff in the middle. Right? So in this case, appointments of 2 equals null, it evaluates to true, because it is true that the value of appointments 2 is equal to null. So now we can do the stuff inside the if statement. All right, so what does that first thing do? Final int time equals, what are we doing there? Now, okay, start of day. Start of day is 9. Why do we have this? Why do we declare this constant 9? Well, we want to say when is the start of the day, and we assume it's 9 a.m. When the index into an array starts from what? Yeah. 0. So like I've written down here, we number the elements of the array always starting from 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I want to say I have an appointment at 11 o'clock, where is the 11 o'clock slot going to appear in here? Is it going to appear in position number 11 or somewhere else? All right, so it'll be 9, 10, 11. Okay? Because our day starts at 9 o'clock, the first slot is our 9 o'clock slot. The second one is 10 o'clock. The third one is 11 o'clock. So the reason for doing that start of day plus slot is that we're going to go through our array looking for a time when we can fit in our 3-hour appointment, right? And we want to return not slot number 0, 1, 2, 3, but the actual hour, the right time of day. So the right time of day is start of day, which is 9 o'clock, plus the index, plus slot. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, now what's the next bit? If duration is 1. So what's duration to start with? Just remind us. What's the variable duration? Okay, how long we want the appointment for. And so we're saying if the appointment is only 1 hour long, then we can just return time as being the first empty slot that we can fit this 1 hour appointment. Okay? All right, so the next part is more complicated. It is intended to deal with appointments that are longer than 1 hour. So you have to remember that when we have an appointment that's longer than an hour, each slot represents 1 hour. So say a 2-hour appointment, we fill in 2 slots. Okay? So if we want to find a 3-hour appointment, we have to find 3 consecutive empty slots. Okay, does that make sense? I mean, if you don't understand, please ask questions, because If you just sit there looking dumb, I have no idea whether you are understanding, you're falling asleep, you don't understand anything I've said. So please ask questions. All right. So the next piece of code, the part inside the else, it's there to say, if we have a 3-hour slot, we have to find 3 consecutive empty elements of the array. All right, so one way of doing this is to say further slots required is a variable that we're going to use to count down. Meaning, we start out by saying how many more slots do we need? And if it's a 3-hour slot, well, we already know that we've got 1 empty slot. So if it's a 3-hour slot, we'll count down. If we find another empty slot, it'll be 2, another empty slot, 1, and then we get to 0. We found all the slots we need. Okay? So further slots required is a counter that we will use to count down. And as we find the next empty slot, we subtract 1. So you see here, further slots required minus minus. So the minus minus means subtract 1, doesn't it? You've seen that before, haven't you? Yeah. Nod, because you have seen it before, even if you don't remember. So the minus minus just means subtract 1. So that means, so if we successfully go through there, we're starting out saying we need this many more slots. As we go looking, we find 1, okay, subtract 1, keep going until we get to 0. When we get to 0, we know we've found all the slots that we need. Okay? So we can use counters to count down to help us keep track of what we need to do. Okay, so that for loop is tricky because it's a fairly long one. So let's just read it one bit at a time. The first part says we're going to make our loop counter. We'll call it next slot. And why do we initialize it to slot plus 1? Yep.
I didn't understand the line before.
The further slots?
Yeah.
Okay, let's take it a step at a time. I haven't got an eraser. Anyway, let's suppose that these 3 slots are empty, and they'll accommodate the new point we're trying to make. We've got our loop going through the whole array, and we've come across the first one, and we know that this one is empty because of the if statement up there. Right? Because we said if slots is null, if the slot position is null, then we can start filling in.
So those 3 are empty.
No, hang on. We'll do this. So far, we've only found out that this top one is empty. Okay? Now we want to carry on and find out if we have enough left after this. So I know this one's empty. I'm now going to start looping to find out if the remaining ones that I need are also empty. So I know position slot is empty. So I want to go to slot plus 1. And I also know that the number of slots I need, since I know this one's empty, so I'm looking for 3 empty slots. I know this one's empty, so now I only need 2 remaining slots. Okay? So further slots required is now duration minus 1. So that's 3 minus 1, 2. Right? So there's only 2. We've already found 1 empty slot. We now need to find 2 more empty slots. So further slots required is 2. And we initialize our loop counter to slot plus 1, right, in the for loop. So we've got this one. So tick, we found that one. Now we're going to start looping through looking for the remaining 2. Starting from the next position. Okay. have a look at the condition part of the for loop, the middle element of the for loop. It says if further slots required is greater than 0 and appointment slot is null, then increment next slot and do the further slots required part. So what's that condition tell us? When do we want our loop to stop? Sorry? No, there are two conditions when we want it to stop, right? Because there's an and in there. So this loop could stop for two reasons. One is that we have found all the empty slots that we need. In other words, success. We've found a slot, a space for it. What's the other condition in which the loop could terminate? Yeah, we don't have enough space. So suppose we're looking for a 3-hour slot and we can only find 2 consecutive spaces, right? So that condition there says that this loop will terminate, the loop will keep going as long as you need to find more empty spaces or you've still got empty spaces that you can search. It'll stop if further slots required is 0 or you found a non-empty slot. Did I just confuse you with that? All right. So it'll stop if further slots goes to 0. So if further slots required goes to 0. Or before that you hit a non-empty slot, in which case you have to go on and look for something else. All right? So the next slot plus plus means we just keep counting up with the loop counter. And the further slots required, that's what's done, that's actually the body of the for loop. It's a bit hard to see it the way it's formatted. But the further slots minus minus is the body of the for loop. So that's what's done every time you go through the loop. So all you're doing is subtracting 1 from that counter. Okay. When the for loop finishes, again, tell me what are the 2 conditions in which the for loop can terminate?
One is that if there are no more further slots required.
Yep. In which case, further slots required is 0. Or
is when the next slot is not null.
right. So if you can't find enough empty spaces, then the second part, the appointment's next slot, won't be null. Now, if you come out of the loop because we have found a non-empty slot, like too early, we haven't found enough space, what is the value of further slots required going to be? All right, so this is the tricky one. You're looking puzzled. So if we loop through and we're successful in finding the 3 consecutive empty slots, what should the value of further slots required be? Right, it should be 0 because we start out with needing initially 3, then 2, then 1, then we get to 0. If the loop stops because we can't find enough space, then further slots required will be greater than 0 still. Okay? So, if further slots required is 0, then we've succeeded. We've found enough space, so we can just return the time of day at the beginning of this sequence of empty slots, and we're done. If this is not 0, it means that we have to keep looping, looking to see if we can find any more slots, any more free space. Okay? All right, so the final question is, suppose we go through this loop and there are no full 3-hour spaces left. Right? There's just no more time in the day to fit a 3-hour space. what ends up happening? What? Yeah, but in terms of that code, where do we end up? Okay, so if we end up going all the way through, complete that entire loop without finding the space we need, we're going to fall through to the end and return -1. Okay, so because -1 is obviously an impossible time, we can use that as an error indication or an indication that we couldn't find the time. So if we call now whoever calls this method find space, you have to check if it returns -1, then you know that you're unsuccessful in finding the slot you need, the space you need. If it returns something other than -1, then you assume that it's been successful and it's the right time of day. Okay? So you should really, so if you haven't fully understood all of this, you really should stare at that code and just go through it step by step, draw a picture like I did, and go through step by step to make sure that you understand the logic of what's going on. Right? It's a good example. If you can understand how this works in every detail, every step, then you pretty much understand how to write code. If there are bits you don't understand, then find out. Right? Next time around, ask your tutor or look at the book or ask for help from a friend or whatever. But you really need to be able to understand every bit of that code. And if you can, then you're in pretty good shape as far as knowing how to program. Yep.
It says next slot, right? So
which one?
Next slot,
Which line are we looking at?
the second folder. In the second folder.
Yep.
When it says appointments bracket next slot equals null.
Yep.
So we're checking if the next slot is empty, right?
Yep.
What if there's a slot that's not empty, but there's a slot after that that's empty? What if?
That's okay because we've got a for loop inside a for loop. Right? The outer for loop is effectively looking for the start of a 3-hour block.
Oh, so it's checking for 3 hours.
Well, no, step by step. The inner for loop is looking for our 3 consecutive slots. The outer for loop is looking for the start of this block. So if the inner for loop fails, in other words, you can't find 3 consecutive things, then we're going to skip out to the outer for loop. It will move down again. Okay, so draw a picture. So you're saying, suppose we have 2 empty slots, and here we go. Suppose we have 2 empty slots, and the next one is not empty, but say the next ones are. Right? So the outer for loop is going, let's start from here, and now the inner for loop is saying, is the next one empty? No. Now the outer for loop then moves to the next one, and it says, is the next one empty? Sorry, go down here. So empty, is the next one empty? Yes. But then, oops, now we've come across a full one again. So the outer for loop moves down, moves down, moves down, and now the inner for loop counts ahead, and it finds the full 3 hours. Right? So remember you've got one loop inside another. And effectively, the outer for loop is looking for the start of our 3-hour block, and the inner for loop is counting those 3 hours.
Where does it say that the outer for loop is looking for the start of that?
It doesn't say it. That's what the logic of the program is. If you understand the logic of the program, that's what it says. Okay? All right, so any questions more about that? Like I said, if you haven't absorbed it all, it's a really good exercise to go over this carefully and make sure you understand everything step by step. All right. We're going to move on a little bit now. So we've talked about testing. Next thing we're going to talk about is debugging. So testing is When you write your code like this, you then want to test, is it doing what you think it'll do? Debugging is, you've already got your program out and running, and then a customer rings up and says, hey, this isn't doing what I thought it was going to be doing, should be doing. And you've got to go back sort of through your code, doing some detective work, figuring out where did things go wrong. And one of the things that helps a lot in the design is to make things as modular as possible. And I've talked about this before, that especially with object-oriented programming, you want to define very carefully what each object is supposed to do and try to confine to that object all the operations that affect it. So, because it's late in the afternoon and you're probably, hang on. You're probably asleep. We'll do a demo of some interesting Java programs. Can you hear that? Oh. Why can't you hear this? Oh, this is pretty useless because it's a speech recognition example. So if you can't hear it, we're in trouble. I don't know. Hang on.
Okay. What about appointments?
Can you hear any of this? No. I have no idea what's going on here. So much for my demo.
What appointments do I have now? What can you do?
Is that helping?
Okay. What's the news then? How,
Ah, I think I just
what
hit
can
the...
you do?
So this is a conversational agent. We're talking to it with in speech and natural language.
What's the news then? How
And
about
it's
some local news?
interpreting the speech and trying to figure out an appropriate, the correct response. So that's actually, when we're asking for the news there, that's actually going out live to the ABC RSS feed or something. And that were they were the headlines of whenever the demo was done actually on time. And it's also got a connection to diary and stuff like that. Oh, it did work. Anyway, the reason I just want to show you this is that it's late in the day and you're probably all falling asleep, so I'll show you something a bit of fun. But this is several Java programs actually. There's a Java program on this was a PDA, and there's Java on board the PDA that's acting like a remote microphone and sending the audio signal to the speech recognition thing. That's something we didn't write. That's a commercial piece of software. Speech recognition. Have any of you ever tried doing these dictation systems? Anybody played with those? You can buy dictation software, and you can talk into it and it'll turn each word you speak into text on the page. But once you've got the text, that doesn't understand what you meant. It understands each individual word, but doesn't understand the whole sentence. So that goes to a natural language understanding system that we also wrote in Java. And the Java program tries to understand the expression, whatever you wrote, and then it has to decide, well, okay, you've asked me to look up the news, so then it talks to another Java program that can connect to an RSS feed from the ABC or somewhere else, or connects to your diary or something like that. Right? So there's a lot of quite complex Java code that we've written to do that. I mean, that we did that in-house here. There's another one that we did. I'll skip forward. We need to get this again. Whoops, wrong one. In this case, we've got cameras around the room.
Please turn on the light.
Oops.
Turn off this light.
Sorry, I didn't cut.
Oh.
Please turn on the lights.
Try again.
Please turn on the lights.
So now we've actually got all of these programs connected to the
Turn
room,
off this light.
and it can turn the lights on and off,
I didn't catch that.
and there are cameras that can detect gestures. So in this case, Matt, the guy doing that, is pointing to the light and saying, turn that light on. So the camera is detecting the gesture.
I didn't catch that.
Turn it on.
Are you okay?
So what he was doing there was we were trying to build a system that was, we were pretending, yes, suppose this is looking after someone who's elderly or sick at home, and you wanted to detect a fall so that you can alert the ambulance or something.
Calling emergency
So these cameras are picking up when he falls over. He wasn't paid nearly enough for this because he got bruises and stuff. He had to repeat that many times to get this right. So anyway, these are some of the fun things you can do with Java. The point of showing you these is that the way the system is built, it's divided into chunks like this. And as long as we carefully define the interfaces between these pieces, we can replace them with different things. So we can replace the I/O device, so we can change, instead of talking to this thing, if we just did something simple like typing the natural language expression, it could go straight through and would still work. If we were in that room and we changed the different kinds of lights, or we could also control TVs and radios and other things and say, turn the TV on, change the channel, stuff like that. If you wanted to replace one device with another, you don't have to change the entire system. You only need to change the module that's relevant to that particular device, or whatever it is you change. And as long as you keep the interface between these modules, you publish and say, this is my interface, and as long as you obey the rules of that interface, then you can connect anything you like to it. All right? And when you when you look at the Java API, so if you look up and say what the API for array list or hash map or whatever else it is, what the people who wrote the Java libraries did was they defined very carefully what is the interface that I need for this module, and as long as you write according to that interface, you can plug whatever you like into it. Okay? So, and this is important when you're building up large bits of code. If you're able to modularize like that, First of all, it makes your code a lot more flexible because you can do this plug and play kind of thing. It also means that when you come to, if there are bugs in it, it's easier to isolate the bugs because you know you've defined the input and output behavior of all the modules. You can test, is this module behaving the way it's supposed to? Is this one behaving as it's supposed to? And so you can localize the error fairly easily. So you might decide that the natural language part, it's not obeying the interface that you sort of agreed on. And if that's the case, the bug is in the natural language part, and you focus on that to do your debugging. So another example, this time with BlueJ, if I can find it. Okay. This is a calculator object that we created, and I can smooth it across. I can do something like type in some numbers and then click plus, and then another number, then equals, and we get our result. Okay. Now have a look at the modules that we've constructed, that we're building here. The way that this has been created, there's a GUI part, and if we have time in a couple of weeks, we'll look at how to use Java to write these graphical user interfaces. But for now, just it's there. But the actual calculator part, the thing that does the arithmetic, it doesn't depend, or shouldn't depend, on anything like clicking on buttons and stuff. It only needs to know about how to do arithmetic. So we do not want to mix GUI code with calculator code. All right? But so what that allows us to do is, if we want to, we can throw away the GUI code and instead just use a simple typewriter interface and just type 22 plus 63, whatever it was that I entered. So, in other words, by isolating the calculator part, the thing that actually does the arithmetic, from the interface part, it allows me to decide I want to change the interface, and I don't have to worry about changing the calculator. Okay? So when you're writing your code, you should be thinking, what are the bits that sort of belong to each other, that I can isolate as a unit, like the calculator part, and what's the bit that is something else, like the interface part. Okay, no, we won't go through this code in detail because it uses stuff that we'll come across later on. So anyway, this is just to illustrate the principle again, that by separating things out, you get the flexibility that you can take one module out, replace it by another, and it all works happily. Okay. No, okay, we won't worry about this. We'll finish up today for now. So we'll carry on next Tuesday.